Thank you. Dr. T. Kumanan sir, Professor and Head, Department of Psychiatry, Madurai Medical College. He completed his MBBS in 1987 and completed his DPM in 1990 and MD Psychiatry in 1994, all from Madurai Medical College, Madurai Manni Maindan. And he's a postgraduate teacher since 1998 and PG examiner from various medical universities. IPS activities, he is the current president-elect IPS Tamil Nadu chapter, past secretary IPS Tamil Nadu chapter from 2013 to 17, chairman CME committee IPS South Zone from 16 to 17. His areas of interest were PG teaching, liaison psychiatry, and the next chairperson is Dr. J. Jayaprakash, psychiatrist from Erode. He is the director of Manadin Mayyam. He is a medical graduate from Raja Mutaya Medical College, Annamalai University, passed out in 1996. He completed his diploma in psychological medicine from Father Sumlas Institute of Medical Education and Research, Rajiv Gandhi Medical University. He has worked as a special trainee in Institute of Mental Health and as a lecturer in PSG Medical College, Coimbatore. He has been a private consultant at Erode for the past from 2001. He has established and functions as the director of Manadin Mayyam, an integrated and comprehensive mental health care facility. His center offers traditional outpatient and inpatient services along with outreach programs in the form of camps and in-campus mental health counseling services in institutions. Manadin Mayyam is in the process of launching NESAM, emotional crisis and suicide preventions helpline in the lines of Sneha, Chennai, under the guidance of Befrienders India. This will be a project of Manadin Mayyam Foundation and will be the first in Chennai, that is in Tamil Nadu, excluding Chennai. He is also the founder president of Erode Mental Health Foundation, a collaborative effort of all the mental health professionals of Erode districts in Tamil Nadu. This foundation conducts public awareness programs related to mental health issues along with mental health advocacy at the district level. Dr. Jayaprakash has been the lead coordinator of the Tamil Lexicon for Mental Health, a project of Indian Psychiatric Society Tamil Nadu chapter in collaboration with the Department of Lexicology, University of Madras. Thank you, sir, for your kind participation. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this third session. And so far, we have been sailing in smooth and safe waters, not a rough sea. And now we are going to experience how to tackle or how to navigate through choppy waters. The choppy waters is a direct or indirect referral to the turbulence or turmoil the adolescent during the adolescent development. The child forms into a boy or a girl and to an adolescence and then to a adult. So I consider a lot of synonyms for these terms. Navigating choppy waters, or we can simply say walking a tightrope, just like people doing in circus, because this topic deals with discussing gender, sexuality and substance abuse with youth. Three separate components, very tough, or they naturally evolve. Usually they say regarding sexuality, whenever when I was a student, college student or school student, I have come across these terms regarding sexual discussion. That time sex was a taboo or it was not an outspoken topic, just like now. Now in the advent of internet and the WWW revolution, World Wide Web revolution, everything is within your packet. And that is not in a appropriate age. There is no restriction. Morning in the inaugural session also they were telling our president was giving about this press meet regarding the press freedom. So it is impossible to enforce parental guidance in our setup. It is almost not possible, and even our government may not be able to enforce that. So in this current atmosphere, it is very difficult to discuss sexuality in the youth, and particularly by the parents or the caregivers. So they simply brush aside saying that it may be a denial. மீன் குஞ்சுக்கு நீந்த கற்றுக் கொடுக்க தேவையில்லை. See, sex, now lot of misconceptions, myth, you can see from the your personal experience, and you would have come across lot of case studies. So it's very difficult to talk about sexuality towards the youth, and now the concepts are also changing. You can see if you go to the net, they will say LGBT, LGBT. I got confused, lot of had a confusion, what they are adding, going on, telling about some neologisms or other thing. It is simple, lesbian, lesbian, gay, bisexual and transsexual. So LGBT. So even for this is very difficult. And now we have a lot of changes in this DSM classification regarding gender identity and other problems. And the next one is the perennial thing, drug abuse. It's not at all possible, even after a ban and other things, we are getting drugs more than the banned times very easily. So all these three problems are interlinked. They are part and parcel of a adolescent or a normal child's development. They have to come across. Not only here, even in Western countries, the same thing. One of my classmates is a senior most consultant in US. When he was talking to me about his son's behavior in the school, when they were going to a theater in US, and his son was telling him that, Dad, do you know what these fellows are doing? He was pointing, he was supposed to be pointing out to somebody standing in the end of the theater, at the corner of the theater. They are using cannabis. They are taking pot. Then my friend has asked, how do you know? How do you know? So I told him that your son also may be using because of the peer pressure. But he became little jittery, but he said, no, he has control. But how many people will have control? They have to succumb to peer pressure. Even Western countries, it is there. One example I will tell during the history taking. My professor used to gesture out regarding when you are asking about substance abuse, that if you are smoking, you can just show as if you are smoking, you can mind that. And when we used to squeeze the palm with the hand with the fingers, asking the individuals whether they are using some cannabis or other this tobacco. So when I just asked in front of his father, a child or adolescent boy, the boy said no, and the boy said no, and father also said no. Then his father said, "Sir, avanukku adha pathila onnume theriyadu." Then I told his father, see, even before you shake your head, he told that he doesn't know that. That means he knows about the substance abuse, and he said, I am not having that habit. So don't be just like a frog in the well. Kanathu thavalaya irukadinga. He is knowing everything, but whether we are here to ascertain whether he is using that, or he is conniving with the other people, or he is having a license with the other people. So it's a very difficult thing when you are come across substance abuse. They are now have become a part and parcel of the adolescent development, and many cultures, it has become acceptable. We can see family members taking alcohol in one hand and the children playing there. So it's very difficult to say that it is not for you. Then they may be asking questions because of that, their curiosity and their ignorance. So in this period, it's very difficult to tackle them. So we are going to hear, or we are going to learn about the navigation through choppy waters or tightrope walking from a psychiatrist, from a child psychiatrist. I think she was the second batch student of NIMHANS, following Dr. Preeti. So with these few words, I hand over the mic to Dr. Jayaprakash for introduction of the speaker.
It's certainly my privilege to introduce the able sailor who's going to navigate these choppy waters. This is Dr. Soumya Bhaskaran from Coimbatore, who runs the Insight Clinic there. She has finished her MBBS from Mahatma Gandhi Missions Medical College, Mumbai, Maharashtra in 2007. Her MD Psychiatry from IMH Chennai, and her DM in Child Psychiatry from NIMHANS. She's had many awards, including the Best Poster Award in the Biennial Indian Association of Child Psychiatry Conference in Pune. She has had a partial scholarship to attend the International Society for Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect Congress in Calgary, Canada in August 2016. She's been given the Indian Council of Medical Research Travel Award to attend World Congress of Psychiatry in 2014. She has authored many papers and written book chapters. And apart from all this, since I work in a town close to hers, I've had the privilege or the chance to refer quite a few of my clients over to Dr. Soumya, and she has, in fact, very ably navigated those choppy waters, and we will have much to learn from her session. Welcome, Dr. Soumya.
Am I audible? If somebody can just chat or have a thumbs up. I'm hoping I'm audible. I'm going to share my screen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for IPSTN chapter for inviting me, TKT Psychiatry Association for inviting me to speak here, and the very kind introduction by both Dr. Kumanan and Dr. Jayaprakash. So while I was invited to talk and asked, the challenges in child and adolescent psychiatry, what I thought I would do was first look at, with this pandemic, what was the most challenging thing for me? And then I came across these things that are a challenge for me, that have been a challenge for me this year. So here I am. I'm going to share my screen in a bit to see. Yes, let me see what I am up to. Just a second. Just give me a second. Yeah, so here goes. So then I thought about this. So, but my perspective really is going to be, as opposed to the previous speakers, Dr. Shekhar, who spoke about children in difficult circumstances, Dr. P.P. Kannan, who spoke about practice in the government sector, I'm going to come from a slightly more privileged perspective than that, I think, which is about work from, a more middle class, upper middle class kind of a privileged private practice kind of a orientation. So let's begin. What makes working with youth so challenging? It's possibly communicating with, like Dr. Kumanan said, a personality who's undergoing a lot of psychological and social changes. It's important for us to wonder whether we're able to really see things from their side, understand their lifestyle. It needs constant energy and tackling on-the-spot crisis, supporting them through difficult and unsafe experiences. For example, unsafe sex, let's say. They do not share adults' understanding of the society. Their cognitive abilities to distinguish between treatment alternatives and to remain hopeful and impartial during this. So let me set off with one thing that started me to think this year. The question from a relative of mine, which was, are you queer friendly? And I began to think, this wasn't a term that we were talking about when I did my MD. We did talk about gender identity disorder when I was doing my DM, but we didn't talk much about being queer, what being queer means. So I sat to think about it, and I thought of one of my old, somebody that I had seen 2 years ago. So a 17-year-old boy I had seen with history of school refusal, with increased internet use, aggression, who was brought for evaluation. The parent did report that he had come out as gay a few months back. Mother said she can accept it despite, the kind of social impact that it brings. Dad said, I can't understand it. There were marital issues. Father was unable to relate to the son, but had a really warm relationship with the other son, which caused P a lot of distress. What I did was I made a diagnosis of anxiety NOS. And then my approach was, I told the parent that I think being gay is normal. So I can't talk about conversion or things like that. That's not what I do. I worked on anxiety. I labeled it. I helped him cope with anxiety. I tried to help him improve relationship with his parents, work on communication, negotiation, father-child relationship. They came for sessions on and off and were lost to follow up. Now, when I was thinking about being queer friendly, and I put this and I said, did I do everything that I had to do? And that led me into a journey to understand more about LGBTQIA+. So it was about improving my understanding, really. Understanding that, which in queer language is the cis-het gaze, that is the cisgender heterosexual gaze, which looked at biological sex, which is the gender that was assigned, the sex that was assigned to me at birth. So I was assigned, being female at birth. The gender identity is how I think of myself. So regardless of what the doctor or my parents may have assigned me at birth, how I think of myself is gender identity. Gender expression is how I show up in the world. My hairstyle, possibly what I wear, and that's my gender expression, which need not link with my biological sex or my gender identity. Sexuality, whom am I physically attracted to? Whom am I emotionally attracted to? And that kind of spectrum is and so across that is LGBTQIA+. So it is lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, asexual, and allies. So and furthermore, improving my understanding, we went to what queer is. Queer, it was initially a slur, which is reclaimed by the Queer Network now. Now, they say they are questioning the heterosexual framework. Man marries woman. The gender binary system, is it only male and female? Or the third gender, can we not be anything else? Heteronormativity, which is lifestyle norms, distinct gender. There's a natural role, which is in alignment with biological sex. Then there's a gender identity. So for example, if I'm assigned female at birth, because my body looked female, I must identify as a woman. I must be feminine and fulfill all roles that are technically women, means cook, clean, take care of babies, take care of the house, be romantically and sexually attracted to men. So this is the heteronormativity that is challenged and needs to be challenged. The third concept is about heterosexual privilege. That is the advantage and privilege that heteronormative people, that is people who identify with whatever sex that they were given at birth, and people who then go on, let's say me, I go on to marry a male. So then this is the heteronormative existence. So the advantage and privilege that I get for being like many other people. Reflections. So then when I looked at all of this and read more, I said, did I ever ask him about his gender identity? I'm not sure. Did I engage in homo avoidance? See, a lot of people, what happens is, I may say, you know what, I'm okay, I'm open, I think gay is okay, I think trans is okay, I think all of it is okay. But without truly understanding what their life is about. So I didn't engage in any conversation about, the client's process of self-discovery. How did he come out to self and others, and what was it like? Sexual relationships, his experiences and relationships. I didn't ask about any of that. Was I uncomfortable? Maybe I was, because I thought maybe I don't know enough. Queer stress, which is different from typical stresses that all young people face. People who identify as queer face different stresses. Unique struggles with coming out, struggles in their day-to-day existence. So when somebody is queer, it's important to have an idea of the kind of stresses that they may undergo. So reflections again, in terms of their developmental trajectory itself, isolation. Because in a society that thrives on heteronormativity, isolation, am I the only one like this? I don't see more people who are praised and gay, praised and lesbian, trans. So, so people wonder, am I the only one? Is this okay? Invisibility. People are unable to see people like them, resources, images that celebrate their reality, like we have heterosexual, cisgender people. Internalized homonegativity, where there are negative. So usually what happens, we may all have seen, is when somebody is transgender and the parent brings us to say, how will he, or she survive in the society? What will happen to them? Can you please help them understand this? So there are negative messages and rejection by society, which is internalized by them. I'm not good enough. Why am I not like everybody else? Experience of social marginalization. So how do people look at people? I mean, is it even possible for a 16-year-old, a 15-year-old to say, you know what, I think I'm lesbian? I mean, or let's say a 23-year-old or 24-year-old to say out loud. Let's say even let's examine in our colleges, in our departments, can somebody say that without being marginalized, without being looked at differently? That's something for us to think about. So then I revised. Of course, I didn't have a chance to see this person again, but in my head, I revised my approach, which is what I should. I mean, I think I did it, but I'm not sure. But what one should do is normalizing and validating that, to say that's okay. I mean, and that's normal, and they need to hear it. Externalize the issue. You're not the problem. The homo prejudice society is. Just to look at the problem, take it out of them and place it out. Which the society that says, you know what, male and female are only okay. Heterosexuality is only okay. Asexuality is not okay. So to externalize the problem from there to out. Check for internalized homonegativity. To say, it's a lot of people who say, no, this is not okay. It's internalized from our society and culture. Locate it outside the person. Coming out. How was the experience for people to come out and say it to families? What was it like to come out even themselves that, you know what, maybe I am not heterosexual. Maybe I do not identify with this female gender that was given to me. And how did I come to that? And what was it like for me? And because I know of so many young people who come to my practice. There's one young person that I remember who's flying out. I mean, I know so many people who are flying out only because they're homosexual and they will not be received well here. It's not something that can be accepted by, I mean, do we have homosexual weddings here? I mean, I haven't been to one. I want you to think about, have you all been to any? So then how do you live like that? So then so many people flying abroad just because it's more acceptable. So to understand and empathize with their coming out journeys. Invisibility, you cannot talk to friends about it. There are limited spaces to share. So internet is one of these spaces where you can find people like you. So when this child was using a lot of time in the internet, one question that should have popped up for me was, were you engaging with other people? I mean, to understand more about yourself, about other people, with respect to queerness itself. All parents universally say, do not talk about this to relatives, let's digest this. I understand it comes from a space of genuine concern, but it also internalizes that, not okay. And you're not okay because this is, one part of your identity. So it's like, you're not okay. So that invisibility. And of course, then to say that your identity is not only restricted to who you're attracted to. So it's not the main focus, but it's still important to look at this. Help them cope with the difficult circumstances that they have. Check regarding bullying and discrimination and make sure that something is done about that. And here I'm talking about some internalized ideas. Like I've taken this out of a newspaper article where somebody says the hardest part of being myself and still living is the dilemma that will I live as myself or will I succumb to what's normal to avoid conflict and make them happy? I wish my parents would understand that I'm not going through a phase, that my queerness is real. I know that they mean well and are supportive, but through some unintentional words and actions, it seems that they would just wish I was straight. I want my parents to understand that my sexual orientation is a part of who I am. It does not define me as a human being, neither does it change the person I was before. I'm not straight and that's not in my control. So to understand that this is not something that they decided to be. So in terms of a developmental perspective itself, growing up, these children may grow up with distorted images of themselves in silence and shame, accepting themselves opposed to the social imagery that one can find is a difficult task. So an important part is to work on self-acceptance. So I'm going to see if I can play this video to you, which so nicely represents a day in the life of a transgender teen. This is something that is happening. Let's see if it is. Can you all see it? Okay, I think it doesn't seem to be playing there, but I mean, it's called, so I'm going to move on, but if you all wish to do, it's called Listen. It's a trans teen short film, which is available on YouTube. I'm still going to see if that's kind of happening, but no, it isn't. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Oops. Give me a second. Oops. Yeah, I'm going to move on. I'm sorry, and I don't know how that got disconnected, but I would love you all to see that film, which shows many young people, these are teens who are transgender, about their troubles to go to which bathroom to use. So troubles like this, which is, yeah, I'm going to do that. Yeah. Yeah, how do I introduce myself to relatives? So what do I say? So I use the name that was given to me, which indicates Soumya, but I don't feel I'm a female. So I want to call myself, I don't know, Rakshit. So, you know, how do I introduce myself? So each time I introduce myself with a gender that I don't identify with, how difficult is that? How do I respond to people who dead name me? So I've learned dead name now. I didn't know that before. So dead naming is using a name which I mean, people identified with you with before. So if I was Soumya, but you know, I identify as male, so I call myself Rakshit. So how do I respond to people who are saying Soumya to me when I'm actually Rakshit? So that's something. How do I live with a family who does not want to engage in a conversation about being trans? So how people who are still going to say, you know what, I gave birth to this daughter and that's what she is, irrespective of the fact that I am male. Will my family keep me? How do I deal with this excessive interest in my life? People say, oh, you're trans, you know, what is it like? Tell me more, and things like that. how will my school or college treat me? So how is my professor going to be? So, you know, if I biologically look male, but I want to wear a nose ring, I want to, you know, wear a silver kameez, how would people treat me? How can I wear clothes that I like? Which toilet do I use? How do I participate in tripped or gendered activities? How do I identify safe spaces or safe people to explore my identity with? How do I find access to transition? So these are daily questions that transgender youth face, and it's important to, I feel that I haven't done so. I mean, I'm going to give a disclaimer here again where I don't think I know everything about this, but it's really coming from a learner's perspective. But I think more and more it's important for us to think about how they live their lives and how we can support them. So learning points for me as a mental health professional was I cannot be neutral here. So I cannot say, you know what, yeah, but I have to be like, yes, of course, you're being marginalized. Of course, society is not great to you. So you cannot be neutral there. So update, I think it's so important for us to get updated regarding this. Understand that I cannot completely really understand their lived realities because I'm not there, but affirm their experience of marginalization. Work on identifying my own biases. So when I was thinking about my own biases, I think monogamy is a bias where we look at, you know, one framework, especially for youth. I'm not talking about it in terms of children because, I mean, which is why it says youth. So especially when you look at 18, 19, 20, 21 to 25-year-olds. So, you know, monogamy is like one woman, one man. But LGBTQ or otherwise, I mean, so, you know, you must be only, and a lot of poor people do not, you know, gel with that. And I'm sure a lot of non-poor people don't gel with that. And that's a choice. So where am I directing people to only, you know, only monogamy is okay kind of a perspective? Counter transference, let's say, oh my God, you know, okay, sleeping with 3-4 women, men, a 20-year-old, a 25-year-old who's making decisions, who knows what their boundaries are, who knows how they're navigating through their relationships. So should I have a choice in how they should navigate their relationships is something to think about. So these are two of my biases that I'm working on. My privilege as a heterosexual cisgender person. So I must acknowledge the privileged position that I sit at. Language for urban people, of course, may I ask what your pronouns are? So, you know, how do you address yourself? So should I address you as he, him, she, her? So how do I do that? Are you comfortable sharing some labels that you know, any labels that you identify, pansexual, asexual, things like that. So, and not look into it as only, especially for, you know, 18, 19, 25-year-olds, a passing phase or looking for etiology. So, you know, these doesn't seem to be great exercises. So I'm going to also talk about this. This thing is called charmed circle, which looks at it as, you know, here's the center, which is the charmed circle, which is perfect. Same generation, people who have relationship in the same generation, in a relationship, coupled, procreative, that is, you know, people must get married and have children. Monogamous, married, heterosexual, vanilla sex, bodies only, no pornography at home. So this is the charmed circle where, you know, this is correct. And then there's a larger circle, which is absolutely no casual sex, no cross-generational. I mean, I'm not talking about child sexual abuse here. I'm talking about two adults of a age gap wanting to engage in a relationship. Seeing pornography. I mean, no child porn, of course. Pornography with manufactured objects, SM sex, homosexual, living in sin, promiscuous. So, I mean, is this truly, I mean, should we look at one circle as good and one as bad alone? Or can we look at it as, you know, largely fluid and we are all people? And the idea is to guide people towards making choices that are okay and less hurtful for them and others. So can we like broaden our perspective? So questions that I'm thinking about is, should I have gender on my intake sheet? Currently I have male and female, which is horrible. So that's something that I'm thinking about. Pronouns, he, her, she, her, they, them, ze, her. I think it's pronounced as Z here. So that's something to think about. So where people do not want to ascribe to any gender at all. So how can I make my practice more affirmative? How can I make my physical space more inclusive? So they say talk about having, two same-sex couple, like pictures on your notice board, if you're okay, training for staff not to stare at such people, and more resources and support systems where LGBTQIA persons can meet other people who are similar to them. So I think these are things that I'm thinking about, and I may place a request for you all to think about too, if that's something that interests you. Moving on to the next thing, which is relationships and sex. I'm sure all of us who are practicing online in the pandemic have seen a surge of this, where people are going on Tinder and Bumble, Bumble to find out, to, make friends and have sexual relationships. So an 18-year-old came up to me. All of this was in the last 2 months. I want to know what this making out is all about. There are no adults that you can speak about this with. What was your first time sexual experience like, mom? A 15-year-old asked her mom. A child called me, Doc, I sent a nude to a boy. I'm afraid he will circulate it. Please help me. My parents will kill me. I slept with someone 4 days ago. I'm terrified I will get pregnant. Help me. So, these are so difficult things to tackle, and I'm frankly at my wit's end sometimes. So this is a tightrope I think Dr. Kumaran was talking about, because this is really a tightrope for me. So here is a child who is a 15-year-old who was brought for therapy, feeling sad, suicidal, unable to concentrate in studies, spending a lot of time online, lying to parents, has body image concerns, sleep disturbances. The precipitating event was that she had had a relationship with another 15-year-old boy. The parents found out, forced her to stop it, as it was not her age. Family history, father has a great relationship with his teen. He's able to really negotiate and get her. Mom has a difficult relationship, is quick to anger, and both are psychologically minded. So the basic approach that we initially worked on was self-reflection. That's for me to look at my own views on adolescent sexuality, non-judgmental, making sure that I have a non-judgmental, non-critical attitude, unconditional positive regard, because they're so quick to sense disapproval. When I looked at specific approach, what we did was we worked on grief of losing a relationship, anger with her parents because they forced her out of it when they found they'd kissed. We worked on the parent-child relationship and internet use. Then what happened over about 3-4 months into therapy, parents find out that teen is continuing the relationship, and there was a major crisis. So then we had to work with the parents to say, this is not mistrust, because parents are like, okay, she's telling us she's not in a relationship, but she secretly is. So looking at it as this is not betrayal, but what else would the child have done? There was no space for her views on the relationship. There was no discussion on it. You said you must stop. So she was secretive about it. Would they rather have her do it with? So it seems very clear they'd forced her to stop this relationship twice. So would they rather have her do it without their knowledge or with their knowledge, was a question they had to think about. So I did explain to them, it looks like this child will continue to have this relationship. So would you rather not want to guide her in case of issues that arise so that she can discuss her relationship with you? So then we discussed a framework where they looked at, okay, very reluctantly that we will be okay with it, but we'll have a framework, how often they meet, how often they talk, boundaries. So when we worked with the teen, I did check with her then, how was it like to covertly carry on your relationship, without your parents knowing. So she spoke about how difficult it was, how sad she felt. She had to hide every little thing. She didn't like lying so much. So still be empathetic of her experience of how difficult it was. Issues that it brought up with her parents, they would have constant fights. Negotiation about the current framework. So if they are willing to let you have a boyfriend, what will it be like? And I think it was also important for me to look at, not look at it as betrayal. So she has not been telling me that she was in a relationship, or even addressing feelings. Am I good enough? Maybe I'm not good enough that the child couldn't trust me, or feeling defensive with her because she didn't tell me. These are feelings that we still need to combat and say, no, that's okay. She doesn't need to tell me everything. So what we did was we worked on what are your parents' core values about relationships, what are your core values about relationships. So then we had a platform to talk to the child about what she felt about relationships. We talked about family love versus romantic love, relationships that they have with family, what are the activities that they do with them. So we looked at where she felt family love was unconditional, not non-judgmental, but warm, long-lasting, steady, encouraging, a little judgmental is what she felt it was. Romantic relationships is passionate, conditional, unplanned, unprecedented, lot of, excitement. So then before embarking on a relationship, what are the things we should do? So we looked at, will we think about how well do I know him or her? What are my expectations from this relationship? Do we have the same expectations and objectives? This is something that I have taken a bit of the framework from the Nimhan's Child Project, which Dr. Shekhar was talking about. Evaluating free. So we look at, can two teens discuss this? Evaluating future consequence of present actions. So if I engage in a relationship with this time, discreetly or telling my parents, what does it have in terms of future consequences? If I covertly do it and my parents find out what happens, some parents may be rigid enough to stop education. Is it worth the risk? Things like that we need to think about. How do I tell somebody that I'm not interested? So even if I started a relationship and I'm not interested anymore, how do I do that? These are skills that children need to learn. It's not about right or wrong, but how we make the decisions, how much thought we put into it, and analyze the consequences that are important. So, and we looked at shared values between two young teens is important for having a healthy relationship. So what makes a healthy relationship? So we looked at, I was discussing how honest communication, respect and thoughtfulness, acceptance, trust, what kind of boundaries are important for healthy relationships. List of behaviors to worry about. I think all teens need to know this. People constantly calling, people saying, okay, both of us must only Instagram together. You can't tag anybody else on Instagram apart from me. You must not meet any other boy apart from me. People who constantly call. So there are a list of behaviors from boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever partners that people must worry about. In the teen's relationship, she said, I'm very happy with him. He's caring, listening. There's a lot of respect. He was there for me when nobody was there and accept me for who I am, because she did have some body image issues. So then the parents and I and the teen made rules. So parents know whom she's going out with. She goes out in a group or with her sister. So no alone time with her boyfriend. She tells them where she goes, when she gets home. The parents meet the boy every time he takes her out, but they won't speak a lot to him, no wishing on birthdays or things like that. And also we did a post-date assessment to say, was it fun? Was it respectful? Was it uncomfortable for you? And any time that you do want to be only friends, I think it's important to say, that's it. So then we looked at the second thing, which is sex and relationships. Because I'm sure all of us may agree, we see a lot of young people now engaging in sexting, in making out, in sex itself. So I think it's really important to, am I ready for sex checklist? How do you respond to pressures of having sex? So many young people say, my boyfriend is telling me, send me nudes, send me nudes. So that's something we need to talk to teens about if you don't want to send nudes, how not to do it. If your partner does not want to use condoms, what do? What are your plans for the future? How would they change if you have a possible pregnancy? What would you do if you got pregnant? Are you emotionally ready for sex? These are conversations that I see myself having with 15, 16-year-olds, which I don't think I was thinking about even when I was 20, but that's what it is. So am I ready for sex checklist? I think this is a great checklist for people of many, many ages. So I'm not even restricting it to 25. I wish I had it. Do I love like him? Does he love like me? Can I talk about feelings with him? Is it safe and healthy? Am I doing this just to keep my partner with me? What does this mean for our relationship? Is there any pressure to have sex? Am I looking forward to it? Have I thought through about pros and cons about sex? Will I feel guilty afterwards? Because having said that, we do live in a society where virginity is so important, and women who sleep are with loose morals. So, these are things we internalize anyway. So, will I feel guilty? Have we discussed sexually transmitted diseases? Is there a role of alcohol or drugs? Am I going to do that and do this? If I get an STI, what will I do? Open communication about birth control and future plans, handling pregnancy. So I know a teen who, no, I know a 22-year-old who said, look, I have a good gynecologist. So we use protection, but if I'm going to do it, I know a good gynecologist and she will do the MTP for me. So here's a youth who's thought about it. So will I be in a safe space? I think that's so important because we do not want people covertly taking videos of you. Will it be a safe time to do it? So I see myself discussing this kind of a thing with 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds because so many of them get themselves thinking. So, and this is something that I've been asking my 13, 14, 15-year-olds. Are you sexting or sending nudes? And I act like it's so normal for me to ask that, but it's so really, really hard to say it with a straight face. But so I also do inform that you cannot store a photo or video of anybody nude. If you receive it, please do not share it, delete it immediately. You're worried about a picture, talk to an adult. So we did have one young person recently who did do that. Then we got the parents involved. We got the parents to talk to the boy, made sure it's not shared with anybody, with less blaming of the child, but inviting her for conversation about how to problem solve, because this is a problem. So we also say, can you count? Can you do a quick pro and con list? Can you get up and walk away before you're thinking of sending a nude? Wait it out. Anything, do anything that buys you time if you really want to send a nude. There's a lot of discussions on masturbation that are necessary, on pornography, to say it's not about whether watching pornography is right or wrong, but the kind of depictions that it gives of sex, of how women or men are treated. So it gives off how emotionless the experience of sex is, which is what is problematic. And about the how women and men are, who are engaged in it as discriminated and looked at and misused. That's why pornography is not okay. Not that watching it is a bad thing. So back to the Vinay. So we did work on finding a balance between studies, spending time with family, boyfriend, friendships, hobbies. And then what happened over time was the boyfriend became really lonely, made multiple calls. The young person felt there was lack of space for her. She was a conflict. She was feeling suffocated, but guilty about not being there for her boyfriend. They did work a lot on communication and boundaries. We suggested professional help for the boyfriend. Evidently, he was depressed. He was really restrictive of her. So then we had to decide to break up. But this was a child's choice, which was very different from what was enforced on her. And so, how do I end a relationship? If I leave him, what will happen to him? Will I find someone else? Does it mean I'm ungrateful? These are all questions that we discussed with her. How do I break up? How do I do it gently? What if he, harms himself? So these are questions and reassurance that this child needed. Parental support without saying, I told you so. So we actually enlisted her dad to talk to the boy also, and not jumping into a relationship right after that. Of course, then we did focus on body image and family relationships. So moving on, so this is in the developmental perspective, it's evolution of identity to say, who am I? Formation of sexual orientation happens here. Curiosity about sex, limited opportunity to discuss sexuality with people. Coming to my last, where we look at substance use, really, where we looked at young people who are saying, pot is a natural substance, mom. My mom should use it for anxiety. Or to say, I'm making edibles. And I really had to ask a teen, what are these edibles? And then I did a lot of reading. It's been around so long, it's in our culture. So these are things that people say. So we had a 16-year-old who brought her parents after who was brought by her parents after finding some stash in the cupboard, got under a false pretext. So she was so upset and angry, had not been attending online class, decreased appetite, erratic sleep, was so cautious and suspicious because she felt, this lady is an agent of the parents. So then how do we look at somebody So there is. So it's coming from somebody who may not have smoked or had a drink. So how can we still be, curious? How can we still be respectful of this stance? So we looked at the MI spirit, the motivational interviewing spirit, which is okay to do even with adolescents, which is partnership, which is a conversation and a joint decision making process where the patient is the expert. So many times, like especially if person who's talking to me about edibles, I don't even know edibles, right? So I don't know how to make edibles. So, what is this? What are the other ways so this person is an expert on their life and their family perspective. This partnership plays a vital role in looking at if there is change, that the person is looking at change, acceptance, unconditional positive regard, helping them be autonomous, empathy, affirmative, compassion, actively promoting patient welfare, person welfare, giving priority to their needs, genuine value for well-being. Evocation is about getting their own motivation to change, evoking their inherent ability to go in the positive direction. So these are things that I think are important when we work with all young people, but especially in substance use. The specific approach was about empathetic listening, which was noisy parents. They're always, intruding into my privacy. They don't have a sense of boundaries, things like that. So empathetic listening and engagement without saying, you know what, of course they would do it, right? Because you're smoking ganja. What do you think? But even if that's something that's going on in your head. To say, can we briefly talk about the stash? What is in there? So mostly cannabis on a daily basis, rarely alcohol, eliciting positive aspects of drug use. So she said, it really helps me with studies. I feel stress-free. I feel less lonely. So less good things about using: sleepy, unable to study, amotivated. So, but then quick to say, I like where I am. It helps me from going into serious problems like cutting myself. So then reflection. Okay, so you think it's one way of coping with the kind of current situation that you're at. So then comes critical engagement, where you say, look, I want to be really clear. That any change you make will be up to you. Our time together will be in understanding the current situation, cope with stress, and look at whatever changes you want to make and what that could look like. So you're very clear that you're not steering towards, you know what, ganja is bad, oh my God, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. I mean, we all agree that it's going to do that. I mean, it is. I'm not ever going to say okay, drug use is okay. Especially in developing brains, they're not okay. But we're not going to get far ahead by voicing that upfront like that. That's the point that I'm trying to make. When we looked at detailed history, there was ADD. She excelled in studies. There was a lot of pressure to perform, and failure was unacceptable. So this was when she was in 10th grade. She moved on to 11th grade to a new school, which was very competitive and online with the pandemic. So many people with attention deficit who are coping very, very badly with primarily online studies. So unable to keep up, feeling failure, low self-esteem, bunking, using as a strategy to cope with all of this. Family history also looked at where her elder sister had died before she was born. There was unresolved grief. She didn't have a great relationship with her family. So then we reframed everything. This is something that I'm taking from Dr. Vivek Benegal, and where he talks about it as a brake, gear kind of a problem, where there are no brakes, which is the hypoactive frontal. There is no brakes to say, okay, we must stop here, just do it. The overactive limbic circuit just says, go ahead, be impulsive. Or stuck gears, which is to say that, there's limited problem solving and flexibility. So it's a brake, gear problem. So you're not the problem. This is the problem, is reframing. And then looking at how ADHD or ADD in her case, the anxiety that she felt, the stress that she was saying with the pandemic, all of us are, exacerbated developmental vulnerability, there was social dysfunction and substance use. And therefore, in order to maintain that, and then this continued. So there are also many discussions about cannabis, and this was so nicely done in Manthan a few days back, where a lot of young people say that no, it's legalized. So how do we discuss, what is legalization about? Is it's about the underground drug mafia? Is it about, so many underage people? I mean, so many people in jails? Is it about giving the police force other important things to do? So that's what legalization is about. It's about medicinal uses. I mean, is it really, do we have enough evidence? Confusion about cannabis being natural versus chemical, but say, natural doesn't always mean good. Uh, and to possibly make it a point to say early use of substances has effect on the developing brain, but it's a conversation. You're not an expert and willing to learn. So that's the kind of discussion that really keeps people thinking. And then what we did, I ask about life goals. So the child said, I want to go to ICER. And so you want to go to ICER, but this is how you're doing. So this ambivalence and discrepancy where your goals are this, what is current behavior like, where you're not going to school, not studying, and then to look at what are the changes that, I mean, is there any change that you can look at while I can help you with, I mean, the ADD, the depression, and to look at goal setting. So, okay, do you want to cut off substance use? So how much, how gradually do you want to do it? Things like that. So parenting also, we dealt with poor knowledge of drugs, especially when women or girls are caught with substances. There's a very harsh punitive measures. So reframe as common, reduce blame. There's a lot of pressure on clinician to get immediate results. So that's something to guard against. There's no pressure on you, go slow. So what we did was with withdrawal, I mean, we didn't have to do anything, but we can use benzodiazepines. We treated her with methylphenidate. We gave her escitalopram. Narrative therapy, where there was externalizing, she's not the problem. The problem is the problem. The kind of education systems that we have, which force children to, the coaching classes that we have, meritocracy. What is the larger purpose? Do we have to know what we're, doing in the future? A lot of young people, have that pressure. No, in 11th only I should know. I should have my life chalked out. So then we took discussions on that, structured activities of daily living. We looked at alternate highs, yoga, plan for relapse, handling triggers, social support, things like that. And we worked a lot on family, quality time, and collaborative goals. So it's important to assess for comorbidities, reframe it as a brakes and gear problem, setting common goals, working on allostasis, and treating vulnerability. So coming back there, it's really a search for self-definition in that age. A lot of studies are there to look at early pubertal timing and associated stress where people start looking older, and a lot of people invite them to use substances. Periods of school transition, especially people going on to 11th, people going on to college who are going to use more, increased importance of peers, relative independence from family. So then you may ask me why this, such diverse topics, what binds them together? I was thinking about it myself, but what I think binds them together is us, because these are, I don't know if I can, I mean, not the first, that, the gender issue, it has always been there, but these are still things we're taking more notice of now. So I think it's important here to be respectful and curious, on level with the young person, with willingness to learn from them, understand their world, connect with our own inner adolescence. A lot of times when it's about relationships, I try to connect with my own inner adolescent to say, you know what, I mean, these are kind of how we felt. So even though I may feel, oh my God, they're being so stupid. But, to connect with your own inner adolescent, to surely empathize with that situation, promote autonomy, help them make their own decisions. Problem is the problem. Person is never the problem. Keep a developmental perspective, convey hope and empowerment, acting in their best interest. So, and I always look at this, if we're committed to developing young people, we must be equally committed in developing ourselves. So especially in this area, I feel there's so much need to continuously update and work. So these are things that I am currently working on. So here are a few references. I felt the Gay Affirmative Counseling Practice Resource Guide was very useful for me. This book called Dating Smarts was also really good. And the Nimhans Child Project. These are 3 resources that I use intensively in my practice. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for a wonderful presentation. Now the session is open for questions.
Would like the chairpersons to add.
Uh,
And Dr. Jayantini madam has given a message that it was a very good presentation.
Thank you so much.
Excellent, she has messaged.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Means
just
a lot to me.
my observation throughout these three sessions, three divisions in this presentation, and most of the time it seems that we alone cannot manage these problems. We need people who need to spend more time, because as a medical professional we will be busy with seeing cases, and we are used to, for prescription or managing with the pharmacotherapy mostly, our basic teaching, because 5 years MBBS I think is not totally needed for managing this type of patients. What's your opinion, Dr. Soumya? Because 5 years after going through MBBS session and going to postgraduate session, and we are trying to tackle them with just dialectical therapy or behavior therapy or supportive therapy or counseling. Can we have a help from persons who can assist us in tackling these type of cases? Because it needs a lot of time, and you cannot expect them to change immediately, because most of them, some of this transgender problem can go for a biological change also, or they have a biological basis also. So there we can try to tackle. In other things, I think the role of psychiatrists seems minimal or little or marginal than any other condition. Any opinion regarding this?
Okay. That's a very interesting question. See, sir, the way I look at it, I think there is a great amount of time that is necessary to do this. I have no doubt about that. And coming from a private practice setting, an enormous amount of money as well. So if I see them for XY number of sessions, it's an enormous amount of money spent for so many things which are going to take a lot of time. So, and I don't think it needs a specific, I mean, does it need only a child and adolescent psychiatrist to do this? Not really. But anybody who's grounded in the principles of therapy and who knows what being child-centric is. So that's what is most necessary, I think. So I don't think this is, I mean, lot of people, like when we're doing the child and adolescent mental health, I mean, I'm also participating in a course which helps people who with basic graduation, not even in psychology. And even they can do it. I think anybody can do it. And people who run a large practice, who have, OPDs running, I don't think, I mean, this requires a lot of patience and energy. So I don't think it's anybody who is willing to extend that kind of time and energy to children's well-being can do it.
That was a very comprehensive and extensive review of all the three topics we have taken up, Doctor. But as Dr. Kumaran rightly pointed out, and you also agreed to, it takes an inordinate amount of time and money for us to address these issues without any tangible point of stopping the therapy, because these are ongoing issues, and generally gender non-conformity is not something which is acceptable at any point. It goes on. The issues they face are lifelong. In that way, I would say, it would be better if we train one of our psychologists to specially deal with gender issues, because I do see an increasing awareness of gender non-conformity in the adolescents, especially in the last 1 year. Maybe it's got something to do with the children spending a lot more time online due to their classes and the sidelines looking into issues which are really bothering them and trying to find answers. I was a little shocked a few months back when within 1 month I had to handle 3 children in Erode, which is a tier 3 town with gender issues. That said, I would like to add one document to your list of references, which I found very useful when I was handling these children, and that's called the Standards of Care for Health of Transsexual, Transgender and Gender Non-Conforming People, version 7. And this is a document which has been published by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. The postgraduates who are watching this, I would highly recommend that you go through this document to understand the complete spectrum of the rainbow that the LGBTQ community holds up. And as professionals, I think we all, seniors, juniors, all together, should make an effort to understand gender issues and all the aftermath it brings on to the family. With that, I'll open the floor for questions if there are any.
Thank you, sir. There are no questions from the chat box, but Dr. Maithili Pratap ma'am has congratulated you, ma'am, for a comprehensive presentation. Personally, a big fan of your presentations, ma'am. The way you explained with case vignettes is very impressive. Thank you, ma'am. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Panneerselvam sir, organizing chairman, to honor Dr. Kumanan sir with a memento and a certificate. Thank you, sir. I invite Dr. Sivasailam sir, organizing secretary, to honor Dr. Jayaprakash sir for chairing the session.